Hi everyone, this is another episode of the Armpit Intellectuals. This is me, Bilal, and I'm joined with your host, Zahra.
Hello.
Hello, Zahra.
Hello, Bilal. Eid
Or
Mubarak.
Khair Mubarak. This is a special Eid that we have got together and trying to put something up regarding a Marxist-Leninist movement that originated in Sindh. Not mostly, but based by women workers of the rural class, which was called the Sindhiyani Tehreek. Now, I want to give my shout outs to Gohar Memon, who wrote an article in jamhoor.org. I urge everyone to go ahead and read it. We have tried to condense whatever we could from that article to make it palatable for our audience and the podcast. So the Sindhiyani Tehreek emerged in the early 80s in Pakistan, Sindh, led by, as I mentioned, rural women. During General Zia's regime, the ST actively opposed his dictatorship as part of the broader democracy movement. It was mostly the MRD, which we're going to touch upon later a bit. Following Zia's assassination in 88, the Tehreek campaigned for Sindh's fair water allocation, resisting dam constructions that harmed the province and thus seeking environmental justice for the indigenous land. I think mostly these constructions were the Kalabagh Dam. So yeah, okay. The Tehreek's resistance persisted through the regimes of Benazir Bhutto, Nawaz Sharif, and Musharraf, thus spanning at least 2 decades and still continues on today. Despite their age, the ST's female leaders remain steadfast in their resistance, being rural women from lower class backgrounds spanning a variety of ages. So it's kind of the antithesis of today's Aurat March, maybe. So Zara, what ignited this rebellion or their rebellion?
Well, I believe in a society marked by male dominance, patriarchy, and feudalism, where honor killings, low rural female literacy, and unreported domestic violence prevail, as we know. I think the bigger question is, how did these rural women lead a resistance against oppressive regimes? And can the Sindhiyani Tehreek be classified as a quote unquote feminist movement? And what insights can it offer to contemporary feminist resistance in Pakistan? I think these are the questions that we'll be getting into today. And to understand the Tehreek's significance and its potential contributions to ongoing feminist struggles, especially from a grassroots perspective.
Yeah.
So, Bilal, do you want to talk a little bit more about the origins of the Sindhiyani Tehreek?
Yeah, sure. So basically, the Sindhiyani Tehreek's roots lie within the Awami Tehreek. It's a progressive Sindhi political party, I would say, whose leader, Rasool Baks Palijo, was a prominent leftist figure. I would say he was more on the side of Marxist-Leninist,
Some touch of Maoism,
some
maybe?
touch of Maoism as well, I guess. Why did so Palijo actually distanced himself from the mainstream leftist ideologies, because he thought that the ideologies were centered around national question regarding Sindh's relationship with Pakistan. So he critiqued them, and he also opposed orthodox communist support for Muslim nationhood and cooperation with the feudal dominated Muslim League. So, and post-partition Pakistan saw neglect of issues, linguistic autonomy, and fair water distribution in leftist discourse. So he was basically, kind of against these nationalistic kind of leftist policies or mindset, but he didn't. He was more on. He wanted to take more on the local issues of water distribution and other linguistic autonomy, these kinds of issues, rather than just looking Marxism as like something that's become a fashion sort of thing.
Right. And so
So-
the one unit scheme in 1954 and subsequent dam constructions favored the non Sindhi elites, as we discussed in our previous episode.
Right.
Episode 2, I believe, on Pakistan's military economy. We had unveiled that during Ayub Khan's regime, he had granted, I think it's between 100,000 and 300,000 acres of land in Sindh to non-Sindhi military elite.
Military and bureaucratic elite.
And bureaucratic elite, yeah, exactly. So, of course, one can imagine that this would increase tensions from Sindhis for who that land is indigenous. And then the Indus Water Treaty of 1960 further marginalized Sindh, leading to perpetual water shortages, which we'll also get into more detail later. And you said, Bilal, the cultural and linguistic suppression fueled Sindhi nationalism, right? So, and Sindh had a large role to play in Pakistan's creation. So, again, similar to Bangladesh, to Bengali people and their language, Bangla, I think it was a very similar kind of exclusion, like just cutting out the importance of their cultural heritage. And I think GM Said is also a pretty significant person in this equation, maybe in terms of where Palijo is concerned. So do you want to maybe talk about that?
Yeah, so I mean, just right after, I think, the creation of Pakistan, as you mentioned, Sindh sort of faced this autonomy issue. It has these challenges to its autonomy. So right after, even though GM Said was in favor of Pakistan and when it had come into being, GM Said, he faced repression for advocating. Later on, he distanced himself from the nationalist, the one unit question, and he started focusing on nationalism, Sindhi nationalism, because he faced this repression which was highlighting the challenges to the regional identity. But Palijo, on the other hand, proposed was kind of didn't agree with GM Sayyid that this wasn't sort of, you shouldn't fight or mobilize for getting a different state, but was more proposed a national people's democratic revolution, combining nationalism, socialism, and democracy to address these issues. And
wow, that's pretty incredible to know.
Yeah.
And I think that when we're talking about the Sindhiyani Tehreek, we have to assess the involvement of women in the movement. So that's essentially what the Tehreek was. It was the involvement of women alongside the Awami Tehreek, alongside Palijo's beliefs.
Right.
And Palijo actively involved women in the revolutionary movement, organizing them in rural areas, Jangshahi, Sindh, and women Akhtar Baloch, influenced by Palijo's ideology, and played key roles in advocating for Sindhi rights despite facing imprisonment. And I believe Akhtar Baloch also had a book published. I think it's by OUP, Oxford University Press. I could be wrong. But it's called Prison Narratives, and it's about Akhtar Baloch's time in prison.
Okay, yeah. I think I've heard about that.
Okay,
or maybe just read about it some.
Yeah, I would love to read that, and I think it's really, important narratives, important stories. So how did the Sindhiyani Tehreek emerge? I guess, as mentioned, women were inspired by the Awami Tehreek's principles, which led to the formation of the Tehreek, the Sindhiyani Tehreek, in the early 80s.
Yes, yeah.
And
it's important to differentiate between the Awami Tehreek and the Sindhiyani Tehreek.
For sure, of course. They may be related, but they're still separate.
A totally separate one, yeah.
And the ST's emergence challenged traditional power structures in a patriarchal and feudal society. Of course, we know that about Pakistan, which actually laid the groundwork for feminist resistance in Pakistan going forward, post-Zia time. And I think that that's also very important for us to know, especially you said how Aurat March is the idea of feminist resistance in Pakistan when it is primarily run by upper class urban upper middle class women.
Yeah.
So I think we'll be getting into this further and including
Yeah, I'm just saying that you could, who knows, the Aurat March could have been, someone would have been inspired by Sindhiyani Tehreek. Who knows?
That's true. I did read that the Sindhiyani Tehreek did join the 2020 Aurat March.
Oh, they did. Okay. That's cool. Yeah. We'll look at it later that Sindhiyani Tehreek did lose some sort of maybe leadership or something like that. So maybe today, if they don't have certain leadership, there's this kind of, there's always this idea that why they should be under Awami Tehreek's shadow. They should have their own political party, where if they have their own leaders, They shouldn't worry if someone is dead, like a leader dies or something.
Yeah.
They should have some sort of their own
Leader
independence.
is passed away, has passed away, right?
Yeah, so I'm just saying that they should have their independent leadership, that they shouldn't rely on the Awami Tehreek or any other party at that.
For sure.
For sure. So
Yeah.
so maybe this new urban class, maybe they get urban class movement, maybe they get together with the Sindhiyani Tehreek and make something of a bigger movement.
Yeah, of course. I think that's what Aurat March represents.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of women from different ages, class backgrounds, ethnicities
Right.
that march. So, I mean, it is part of a larger movement, but I think just as someone who is considered an urbanized upper class Pakistani feminist, just being from my own subjectivity, it's just I didn't know about the Sindhiyani thing.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Until very recently.
That's very true.
And I mean, knowing about them, knowing about their story, it definitely shapes my feminist politics in a different way to be more. I mean, of course, one can imagine that more rural, working class women in Pakistan, of course, have their feminist movements. And the Sindhiyani Tehreek, they maybe did not have the academic background or the language to explain Marxism or Leninism, but they were obviously practicing
it, yeah.
those politics. So I think that's really fascinating. And I think that it's important to talk about more movements I think they should be put to the forefront of Pakistan's feminists.
I mean, yeah, even they didn't know what they were doing. Being under Police Joe's guidance was somewhat good because he was basically someone who was teaching these ideas. But once they had learned it, I guess now they do need some better leadership, which can come from anywhere, I guess. I hope it is.
Yeah, definitely. So now we'll get into what the Sindhiyani Tehreek, when they were formed in the 80s, it was during Zia's regime. And now we'll discuss what occurred during Zia's regime, and a particularly oppressive regime.
Yeah.
So yeah, during Zia's regime, as many of us are aware, Zia had quite oppressive laws. So in 1979, his regime executed Prime Minister Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and introduced the Hudud ordinances, including the controversial Zina ordinance, which harmed women's legal rights. And what was the Zina ordinance specifically? It outlawed extramarital sex. And the ordinance was particularly harmful for women as they lost their legal protection against rape and sexual assault. Under this new law, a sexually assaulted woman had to produce 4 witnesses in court to testify that the assault took place. If no witnesses could be found, the woman herself would then be accused of extramarital sex and face rigorous imprisonment. She could even be stoned to death. And this was happening in other places up until recently. I think the UAE repealed the law, but they had the same law.
Right, yeah.
And
I mean, Bali introduced something that.
Oh, right. Yeah, I think so.
Or maybe Indonesia, except Bali, I don't know.
Right. Well, it's like part of Sharia laws. And so then, yeah, actually speaking of Sharia, so then Zia established the Federal Sharia Court and passed the Qanun-e-Shahadat order, which diminished women's testimony in courts and imposed restrictions on their appearance on TV. So
interesting.
Similar to what is happening in Afghanistan right now.
Right, yeah.
Just kind of removing women from public-facing roles.
When they're even not letting them have education.
Right, that's
I think
next level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so then there was the formation of Women's Action Forum, another feminist organization. And so they emerged in response to Zia's anti-women measures. And the rural-based Sindhiyani Tehreek also protested vigorously. So these two groups kind of formed around the same time. One was largely made of urban, middle-class, upper-class women, and the other was the rural peasantry, as it's been referred to as. And so the Sindhiyani Tehreek actively participated in the movement for restoration of democracy, MRD, alongside other democratic forces confronting the Zia regime in Sindh.
Right.
And And yeah, I think just the organizing of women, Sindhiyani Tehreek members like Khur Palijo mobilized a lot of women, including college students, for protests and prepared them for possible arrests, displaying remarkable courage and determination. And I think that says a lot because in a society entrenched in feudalism, right? Where women are often relegated to inferior roles and expected to be submissive, the Sindhiyani Tehreek emerged as a force of change, especially because it was amongst this more rural, lower class, where there's a greater expectation, one could say, of women to fulfill their patriarchal roles of duty and subservience. And one could say that it sparked revolution, this Tehreek. And it nurtured women who fearlessly challenged the status quo and aimed to reshape society at its core. And I think the strength of these women, their willingness to take risks, and their unwavering courage are vividly illustrated in this incident, which was recounted by Khur. And the incident was first narrated in the research paper by Gohar Ali Memon, which we will link in our description of this episode. So, yes, so this is what Khur Palijo had said about an incident regarding the strength and resilience of these women. As per our routine, we were coming back to Jangshahi from Hyderabad via train. At the station, we noticed some suspicious movement of army soldiers. I had this thought that they might have come to arrest us. We were not terrified, absolutely not, but it was against our party policy to get arrested in some dark train corridor with no witnesses and no one to resist and agitate on the ground. We boarded the train and so did they. We were in the same cabin. We had already chalked out the areas between Jangshahi and Hyderabad, where in case of an emergency we would disembark and stay. There was a station named Latif Jang on the way. We were in a state of indecisiveness due to the presence of the soldiers in the same cabin. We thought that the station had come and all 17 to 18 of us jumped out of the moving train and fell at a distance from each other. With injured limbs, we held on and reached a village. The villagers, with their values of hospitality, tried their best to be hospitable to the injured women, but their material inadequacy was a stumbling block in their zest of cooperation. There was only one cycle in the village, and God knows how we transported the injured to the main road one by one. And so, despite facing arrests and repression, the Sindhiyani Tehreek members maintained their revolutionary spirit in jail even, organizing activities and continuing to chant slogans against General Zia while they were incarcerated. And in a daring move, as we just narrated, of course, the members, just to kind of summarize TLDR, too long didn't read.
Right.
The Tehreek members jumped off a moving train to evade arrest, basically.
Right, yeah. It shows their organization, how organized and kind of
committed they were.
committed to the Tehreek they were.
Even in the face of this kind of danger, the soldiers were coming after them. And yeah, it is, wow, says a lot. And in the book, The Women's Movement in Pakistan, and the women's movement in Pakistan, Activism, Islam, and Democracy, Aisha Khan wrote this: women in the movement for the restoration of democracy, MRD movement, during the 1980s were brutally repressed and attacked by the military for speaking out against the regime and demanding the political rights of the people, particularly in Sindh. And so that just also kind of shows it's this academic sort of book, you could say. And yeah, I mean, it's being recorded, right? There's recorded history of how determined the Sindhiyani Tehreek were and are. But this was particularly during the 80s, MRD, Zia.
Right, yeah.
And it's very inspiring, of course, right? Because I think we largely, I mean, not intentionally, or I'm sure people do it intentionally, but I think there's just this, of course, there's this generalization about more rural, lower class people in Pakistan, right?
Right.
How we just assume ke, I mean, of course, we don't assume that, but of course, there's this narrative ke wo quote unquote jahil hai.
Right, of course. And they don't know what is best for them.
Exactly, as if, and this was something that was happening during the floods in 2022.
Right.
There was a huge narrative about this, because basically a lot of women obviously didn't have their basic necessities.
Mhm.
And what a lot of urbanized upper class women assumed was that these women will need pads, sanitary napkins,
Yeah.
pads ki zarurat hongi.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, that's an unfair assumption because a lot of rural women don't wear pads because it's a large expense. It's quite pricey to buy pads
Ads, yeah.
from the chemist, the market. And so they use cotton cloths, reusable cotton kapra and stuff like
Right.
that. And it was just a very ignorant kind of assumption
Mm-hmm.
that unko is cheez ki zarurat hogi.
So,
Like, and then there was this very important and essential point that was made, which is that don't assume, ask the women what they need. So don't
yeah.
ever, I think people really need to, especially as a woman who's obviously interacted with a lot of women who are this. Yeah, it's essential that we don't assume
Right.
other people's needs.
Okay.
We always, if we want to help, you have to
Yeah.
ask them what they need. And excuse me. And I think that the concept of mutual aid as well.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think कि अगर किसी को पैसों की ज़रूरत है, right? It's not your business to ask them what they need money
What
for.
they need money for.
If you are willing to give someone money, you give it to them and that's it. It's not your
Mm.
right to know what they need that money for.
Mm-hmm.
So I went off topic for a
No, that's
second.
exactly on topic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess just kind of wrapping up that Palijo's narrative account.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, so obviously the struggle continued and will continue, but despite setbacks, Benazir's exile and the arrests of leaders Palijo and Fazil,
Mm-hmm.
the MRD movement persisted, with the Sindhyanis demanding the release of political prisoners until Zia's demise in 1988.
Idiot, yeah. So, yeah, that's a very good history and what, like, the whole event
I think
is
it
very
really speaks to their resistance a
Mhm.
lot.
a lot, yeah.
But I think on the other end of things, they also engaged and, of course, continue to engage in environmental activism
You're right, yeah.
and resisting damage or distortion to their indigenous land.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you want to talk a little bit about that, Bilal?
Yeah, so yeah, since its inception, Pakistan has grappled with unresolved issues regarding language rights, provincial autonomy, and equitable water distribution, particularly affecting Sindhi sentiments.
Water?
Water. Yes, because Sindh being the lower riparian gets the whatever is left from the upper riparian, which is Punjab.
Oh,
So
how
yeah, so
poignant.
poignant. Yeah,
Poignant.
poignant.
How symbolic of
So yeah,
the
which
relationship.
exactly, yeah. So following the Indus Water Treaty in 1960, Pakistan sold 3 rivers to India and constructed dams exacerbating water shortages in Sindh, with projects like Chashma Jhelum Link Canal worsening the situation. I mean, which you also saw this was during our, you can say, years when we remember during Musharraf's era when you would see the opposition against Kalabagh Dam as well.
Mhm.
This was proposed in Punjab. The Kalabagh Dam faced strong opposition in Sindh due to fears of further water cuts.
Hmm.
Despite protests, advocates argued for its necessity for hydropower and national development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole thing, right? People who do want the dam say that, yeah, there's going to be another amazing dam, but they don't know that they're sort of sacrificing the provincial autonomy because if that happens, Sindh's literally not going to get any water.
I will sacrifice my provincial autonomy.
Yeah, so they mobilized. So Palijo initiated mobilization against the Kalabagh Dam, drawing support from the Sindhiyani Tehreek. Women, including former Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, joined marches and protested against it. So, yeah, she
The people's
seems to
Bhutto.
be involved. Yeah, the people's Bhutto.
Nare Nare Bhutto.
Nare.
J. Bhutto.
In the late 90s, she participated in one of their protests in Ubaro, it's a small town in Ghotki. And on another occasion, she welcomed the Long March in Karachi, originating from Sakhar. Zahra Sheikh, the late wife of Palijo and leader of the Sindhi Tehreek, recalled an encounter where Benazir Bhutto witnessed the massive crowds of women protesting against the Kalabagh Dam in Karachi. So Bhutto inquired if it was a woman-only march. So this is pretty interesting what Palijo responded to this. Says that it is led by a woman. On your way to the airport, you would see that hundreds and thousands of Sindhis have lined up behind their brave sisters.
Wow.
In the blistering summers of Sindh, they recited verses of Sheikh Ayaz, the province's eminent poet, which means march fast, march slow. The walk is long, who would undertake it? The road is weary, the miseries may swallow. Even then, the walk for beloved is worth it. The walk is worth it, march fast.
Wow, very nice.
Yeah, so from here, we can, I guess, move on to, as I guess, Musharraf's time and
So yeah, more continued resistance.
Continued resistance.
So I guess from Zia's regime to Musharraf's regime, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean it's quite interesting. In general, the history of martial law in Pakistan, and I think we discussed that a lot in our previous episodes as well. I think it's a very main theme. And yeah, I mean, of course, resistance against martial regimes it's inevitable. I just think that it's very interesting to be speaking about movement and organization by women who people may not have expected from then. And I think just kind of following what you said about the Kalabagh Dam, Musharraf had a project, the Greater Thal Canal, which ended up reigniting anti-dam movements in Sindh. And despite resource constraints, the women of the Sindhiyani Tehreek remained at the forefront, reciting poetry and resisting government initiatives. And again, in Zahida Sheikh's memoirs, she reflects on the ST as a grassroots movement led by impoverished, quote-unquote, rural women. And unlike well-funded feminist NGOs, as we've discussed, WAF, Women's Action Forum was also conceived during Zia's regime. So, of course, they continued on. They still continue today. And yeah, unlike those kinds of organizations, which were largely made up of urbanized middle-class women who had the resources to invest in their feminist organization and NGO, the Sindhiyani Tehreek, of course, lacked such resources. And in February 2004, during a quote-unquote peasant conference, the Tehreek was informed about an upcoming anti-Kalabagh convention. And many Sindhiyani members who were eager to participate faced financial constraints after spending their savings on attending the conference itself. So the convention was separate from the conference. And while some managed to attend, actually, many couldn't afford the journey.
Right.
And I guess that represents the struggles, right, of lower middle class women. And Zahra Sheikh recollects another instance when the ST received an invitation to a women's convention in India. And of course, there were concerns about passport requirements because several members didn't have passports. And yeah, I mean, only 6 to 7 women with passports could then travel to India.
Yeah.
And despite these limited resources, they remained rooted in rural Sindh, reflecting its grassroots origins, right? I mean, I wouldn't say that, I don't know if they would, I mean, I guess it's difficult, then mobility is difficult, right? When you don't have, especially in Pakistan,
Yeah,
right?
you don't have passport. I mean, these people, don't have passport. So you can tell by how much maybe impoverished, I guess, they are. And so I mean, you can see by the thing that, like, first of all, I would also question that I mean, India is another thing, but why would you have a conference in Pakistan and make it so expensive for the peasant women to not even be
Because they
able to
don't
travel.
take them seriously, of course.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
There's such a large, stark class divide in Pakistan, right? It's
Right.
ke pade likhe jahil.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no, not even pade likhe jahil.
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 And I hate that word, but I mean, it's so widely used, right? It's such a colloquial way of saying, referring to working class people, rural working class people.
Right.
Yeah, but I do agree with what you're saying. I mean, but I think it's just nobody expects ke haan, ye log. I mean, of course, there are people who do think critically and understand the classism in society and stuff, but
Right.
I think it's can the subaltern speak?
Yeah. I mean, even there must be some, I don't know, are those literature festivals free to attend? I don't know, Islamabad or Karachi. I've never been to one.
I went in November of 2023 to the Islamabad Literature Festival, and if I remember correctly, I honestly can't remember if I went with my stepmother, so if there was a ticket, she paid for it.
Paid for it, okay.
But I don't know. That's a great question. We should look into that. I would just say that they're free,
Right.
but I can't say for sure.
For sure, yeah. Okay, yeah. So I guess we can move on to the resistance and maybe talk about some other challenges.
I mean, well, just to continue on, I mean, when I was discussing the projects, the Kalabagh Dam and the canal project
Right.
that Musharraf had proposed,
Right.
because of the Tehreek's resistance, actually, Musharraf had to abandon his plans. So he abandoned the Thal Canal project.
Okay, so that's organization does help.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It shows the power of grassroots movements in influencing government decisions, state
Right.
decisions. And again, they lack the resources, right? And these financial limitations often hinder participation in events.
Right.
And I think that in itself is so symbolic of how a grassroots group, Sindhiyani Tehreek, is challenging power structures, is challenging the class structures, the
class
hierarchy
structure,
structures, having power in that way, and not needing. I mean, Pakistan to zyada sifarish pe chalta hai, right? And not needing
that kind of
to be able to. That's how impactful
Source.
their resistance is.
Yeah.
That's how seriously they're taking their work. I mean, in these other feminist NGOs, a lot of the women have a certain level of privilege, and people don't completely want to abandon their privilege. But when you don't have any of those privileges, you are literally you're just giving yourself into that work of resistance.
Exactly, yeah.
So, I mean, after kind of going over the history of Sindhiyani Tehreek, I mean, do you maybe want to kind of summarize, what kind of organization it is, what we've discussed, what were their additional influences? We did talk about, Palijo and Awami Tehreek, but is there anything else that you think you could add?
Yeah, so I mean, the Tehreek did face criticism for not being explicitly a feminist organization, which is also a question people raise, that if these women need to be attached or to be linked to a sort of a leftist organization, or they should be just independent organization running on themselves and having the leaders chosen within themselves. And so this is the same thing that you draw from Lenin's perspective on the women's question. And the Tehreek adopted a similar approach, advocating for an independent women's wing within the party. This wing focuses on women's issue while integrating them into the broader revolutionary movement.
Right.
So the organization structure, the Tehreek operates as an affiliated wing again of the Awami Tehreek with its own constitution and areas of operation, while it remains relative autonomy. And it aligns with the party's revolutionary program and participates in major campaigns. So it's still under Awami Tehreek sort of umbrella.
Okay.
But there are some agendas of expansion. Critics argue that the Sindhiyani Tehreek should broaden its focus to address women-specific issues, honor killings, domestic violence, and child marriages. I think they're pretty much, I hope they're working on it, but the organization's priority have been influenced by the political urgencies of water
We
redistribution
should ask
for
them
now.
for an organizational agenda.
Agendas.
Meeting agenda.
Meeting agendas. Yeah.
Let's go sit at the annual general meeting.
Yeah. Let's see what's up. So despite this for broader focus on societal issues, demands have been coming up for equitable resource distribution, water
Right.
indirectly, which empower women by addressing fundamental societal inequalities that affect both men and women in rural Sindh.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also really powerful how it speaks to their desire to protect their indigenous land, Sindh, dams, the canals. I mean, resisting those projects,
Yeah.
right? Protecting the water, the
Yeah.
land. You know,
I mean, it's their life, basically. If they
yeah, it's
don't,
a livelihood, no?
yeah, exactly. So if they have the dams built there, they wouldn't have any water coming into their canals.
Right.
So that's basically just about their survival right
Yeah,
now.
for
So
sure. They're basic
which is
resources.
yeah. So just other people else as well. In conclusion, Jami Chandio, a notable political commentator now. He used to be. I've seen him on KTMs sometimes, and he was a close confidant of Polijo. Highlights
Yeah.
Sindhiyani Tehreek's roots
तुम्हारा सच्चा है?
in Awami Tehreek's reports. KTN. Internal party conflicts and mismanagement have weakened the Awami Tehreek, leading to dispersion of its members into political factions. I mean, I think after the passing away of Palijo in 2018, I guess it lost its direction, and Sindhiyani Tehreek is looking for a new path forward, which also talks to the fact, well, what I was talking before, that it needs to be an independent.
You want to put in your name?
For what? For leading the Tehreek? No, I don't think. No, that's the whole point, right? If there's a Sindhiyani Tehreek, so it should be a woman.
Of course. No, but I was talking about Awami Tehreek. What's the situation?
No, I don't want to lead the Awami Tehreek. If that's what question is, no,
Yeah,
I guess.
I know. It was a joke. It's
And,
a bad joke. But it didn't land very well. But no, what's happening with the Awami Tehreek nowadays?
I'm not sure. I think it's his son is leading the Tehreek, but I don't see it doing much in Hyderabad. I don't. They have sort of got together with GDA, which is the actually I don't think they have, but there was this alliance made in Sindh against PPP. So
Okay.
I don't know if they're part of it, but they're kind of out of scene right now. So
out of scene, out of touch,
out
of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's good to know. But I mean, yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, just to kind of add to the conclusion, I suppose, from my kind of opinions. But I think Pakistan has witnessed significant Aurat marches, right, in recent years.
Yeah.
And
every year.
I mean, but recent years it started, no? I think 2018 mein shuru hua, right?
I think so, yeah.
I think so. And of course, these marches challenge patriarchal norms. However, and I mean, I think I want to say that, of course, a lot of women attend these marches from various class backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds. But I think the people who organize Aurat March are primarily urban women, middle class women, upper class women.
Right.
And I think that within the organizational structure, working class rural women may be excluded.
Right, yeah.
And the Sindhiyani Tehreek has the potential to provide a grassroots foundation to Pakistan's feminist movement.
Right.
And that would bridge the gap between urban and rural women and advocating for sociopolitical change, right? I think it would help to just
bring the synergy.
Yeah, exactly, synergy. Because if these Aurat marches are for Aurats, then it's really important to recognize. I mean, I didn't know about the Sindhiyani Tehreek, and I've been studying feminism, Pakistan feminism, whatever, gender, class, for a long time, and
it has never come up in your studies.
Never.
That's interesting.
Never. So, I mean, of course, other feminist organizations do get mentioned, but more well-known ones, more urbanized, middle-class ones. And yeah, I think that Also, in addition to, of course, one angle of it is the feminist kind of lens, right? The grassroots resistance lens. But I also think, given wo Sindh ke hain, right? And these persistent issues in Sindh, such as unequal resource distribution and erosion of autonomy, Sindhi autonomy, provincial autonomy, highlights further, right, this mission of the Sindhiyani Tehreek, which is not just advocating for themselves as women, but advocating for themselves as Sindhis. And of course, there are still many honor killings, much domestic violence, and of course, forced marriages that have been going on and that remain prevalent in not just in Sindh, but throughout the nation state, right?
Forced conversions are kind of very unique to Sindh.
Sindh-centric, right? The Hindu
Forced
world.
conversions, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And of course, these all kind of signify that this continuation of these grassroots resistance movements are essential,
Right.
important, highly important.
Yeah, so I mean, I would say that Sindh, the Tehreek is kind of poised to cultivate a new generation of revolutionary rural women. I guess the organization shows that it stood against one of the dictators of Pakistan. So I guess it is poised to cultivate a new generation of revolutionary rural women.
Revolutionary women. It's an alliteration. I love it.
Alliteration, yeah.
Revolutionary women.
Who are prepared to address these entrenched injustices.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Thank you very much.